Tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do for Door.
Hello, my name is Mark Sorenson, and this is my sign name. I work for Door International in the capacity of International Translation Director. My position entails overseeing all Door sign language translation projects on a worldwide basis. I oversee every aspect of the process from establishing translation committees and partnerships, recruiting the translation teams, to administrative support such as budgeting and training so that the teams will be able to translate God's Word into their heart language.
How many sign language translation projects is Door currently involved in?
Currently, Door is involved in 8 different sign language translation projects, plus a translation resources development project.
We all know that 2020 was a tough year. So, tell me how that has affected your department in unexpected ways.
Indeed, 2020 was a year. We typically have a lot of in-person team meetings, but the coronavirus has isolated the teams. We've had less in-person sessions and moved our meetings to Zoom. I have to thank God for technology making this possible. We've seen more countries improve the speed of their internet access. If this had happened 5 or 10 years ago, the quality of internet access would have made communicating with other countries impossible. But now, almost everywhere in the world has access to good internet, making it easier for us to meet via Zoom with the teams and the consultants, helping our work stay on track. Also, the teams were able to work together in their own personal quarantine bubbles. If one became sick, they would stay home. And some of our teams had a rotating schedule where only 2 people were in the office at a time, lessening the risks involved with this pandemic.
I love the creativity involved in figuring out how to keep working safely in the middle of a pandemic. Before we go on to another question, I heard something about a big milestone near the end of last year, something to do with the ASL project.
Yes, our partners at Deaf Harbor successfully completed their work on 119 Bible passages in the Chronological Bible Translation, or the CBT. In 2020, they worked overtime to film, refilm, check the passages, edit, and put together all the passages. They got all 119 published on the web, and so many deaf people have told us they immensely enjoyed watching them because of the quality and the clarity of the translation. Many churches use the passages in their services, and it's great seeing that.
I know this milestone is important in more ways than just one. So, could you expand a little more on why that is?
Yes, it's actually interesting because we're seeing more and more countries become familiar with ASL. It's become a common language. Not a first language or a heart language, but for instance, if someone from Russia was connected with someone in France, and if the former didn't know French Sign Language or the latter Russian Sign Language, they will use ASL. English is the business language in most of the world, and ASL is the same. In 2000, I was living in Europe and I attended a deaf conference. They had 9 sign language interpreters up front interpreting the speaker's messages into different sign languages. In 2004, I went to another conference and they had 6 interpreters. I went to Estonia 2 years ago and the conference only had 2 interpreters up front. The presenters were primarily using ASL. Times certainly have changed. Back then, when I would visit different countries, very few people would know ASL. We had to figure out communication via international sign. But now, when I visit other countries, more than half of the deaf community would be familiar with ASL. The reason behind this increasing familiarity is the internet, specifically social media. Most of the world's deaf people are hungry for information in sign language, and most pieces of information found on the internet are in ASL. English is the business language of the world, and ASL is the business language of the deaf world. I want to clarify, Their heart language is still their local language, not ASL, but it is useful for cross-cultural communication.
Wow, that's amazing. Pretty cool to see how deaf people are slowly getting more access to information than ever before in history. Okay, so the coronavirus has definitely affected DOOR in a couple of key ways in 2020. What were some of the challenges translation teams faced?
And the number one challenge the teams faced was the community checks. The checks require a number of people being gathered in one place to watch the translated videos and provide feedback on them. But with COVID-19, gathering people together was difficult. Our teams tried to do the checks via Zoom, but deaf people much prefer in-person interactions. They are highly collective and dialogue is essential, but Zoom makes that challenging. Often, our community checks were postponed in an attempt to wait out the pandemic and for safety. We made do most of the time. Another challenge was due to consulting. Our consultants typically spend a couple of weeks with the teams twice a year, but the pandemic prevented that. So again, we turned to Zoom, but it's not ideal, making teams work harder to get the same amount of work done.
That certainly sounds challenging. Looking ahead, tell us about what you plan to do in 2021.
In 2021, we're working on forming partnerships with several countries. We're hoping to recruit 4 translation teams for next year, but that depends on our survey teams. This is our first step in starting a project. We need to know how many deaf people are within the country, how many believers in deaf churches they have, what the educational situation looks like, and other background information such as deaf schools, etc. The survey teams look into all of the above, helping us make informed decisions about recruiting, partnerships, or whether a country needs a Bible translation or a 2x2 ministry. One challenge is that our survey trips have been pushed back due to COVID-19 because they require a lot of in-person interaction to find out how many sign languages are used in country. But the pandemic has put all of that on hold. We're waiting until the situation improves, and hopefully by next summer we're able to survey several countries. The overall goal is to recruit 4 teams by next year.
Do you anticipate any challenges to your plans for 2021?
A challenge we're currently facing in 2021 is recruiting a team from Sri Lanka. We have funding ready to go for that project, so we're all ready to have a team come and work on the translation. We can't exactly afford to have delays, and we were planning to have the team start at the end of June. However, one obstacle to that is that if we tried to recruit in-country, we'd have to be quarantined for 14 days. In order to recruit, we need several days to do that effectively, including a brief training and teaching on the basic stages and principles of translation, an explanation of chronological Bible translation. Then we'd assign the potential team members a story to practice memorizing, signing, and dialoguing about. This helps us evaluate their skill sets and recruit the right people. The pandemic is an obstacle to our visiting the country, and we were trying to recruit through Zoom conferencing, which is obviously a challenge. My team made videos of the assigned story to give to the potential recruits so that they can practice signing the story on their own. Then they are going to record themselves and send us their completed videos so that we can evaluate them and proceed to interviews via Zoom.
Do you mind telling us about the 50 by 25 goal and how translation ties into that?
That is DOOR's goal, to have 50% of the deaf worldwide be able to have access to God's Word and deaf-led churches by the year 2025. We have a list of countries with deaf population sizes to guide us in selecting the ones with the largest number of deaf people to reach in order to reach the goal of having 50% of the world's deaf population access these two things.
Do you have anything you want to share with us that we may not realize is happening?
I've been working with Door for 22 years, and it is amazing to see how times have changed and technology has made so many things more accessible to the deaf. When we began doing translation work, many deaf communities were resistant. Translation was a new concept to them because they had never seen anything like it, with the translation being on video, etc. In the beginning, many of us had VHS tapes and technology was limited. But today, with our partnerships and the help of social media, more and more deaf communities are aware of God's Word in sign language. And so many of them are passionate about getting that in their sign languages. It's really exciting to see, but now the challenge is our capacity. So many countries reach out to us begging for sign language consultants for their translations. Worldwide, there are only a few consultants, and the need is great. The world is eager for Bible translations in sign language, but we don't have enough consultants for all the projects right now. Please pray for more consultants in sign language projects so we can have more translations happening.
What kind of impact have you seen happen as a result of the translation department's work?
There's actually one story I want to share that is a result of Deaf Harbor's completion of 119 passages last year. Many deaf people shared that their favorite passages were the translated passages from the book of Revelation. Revelation is one of the most complicated and difficult books of the Bible to translate. The passages translated were about the 7 churches and an additional chapter, and the deaf audience loved it. They've been pestering the Deaf Harbor to translate the remaining chapters of Revelation. They are really eager for more, so that's just, the book of Revelation isn't easy to translate, but the community wants more of that. They really enjoyed it because they finally understood it. Sign language has made it come alive for them, and the concepts have become more clear. So they definitely want more.